Well, a good morning to you once again. Thank you so much for having stayed with us all the way from 6:30 to now. It is still morning at NTV. Priscilla, Regina, Naloga here to take note of certain things. One of them is an MP, Kagabo for Bukoto South, yesterday appearing before the leader of opposition, Matthias Mpuga, and stating that he's ready to return the 40 million shillings that he stated was given to him on his bank account, but there was also a cash receipt for it that he received in terms of appreciation for the work they did as members of parliament. And of course, being in the opposition, they had been recommended that they return that money. Now, we want to hear from him this morning as regards to what next with Stephen Mbide. And as Stephen Mbide prepares for that interview, we want to look at the social protection for Karamoja in our tech note. And we do have Patrick Katabaazi, who's the coordinator for Parliamentary Forum on social protection. Now, when we talk about social protection, we can't say it has improved or in one way or another over the years. But then again, it also is something that has proved to be a very important tool in safeguarding and fostering people's ability to meet their food security, nutrition, and associated essential needs, and also to manage the risks and shocks they face. One function of social protection is to manage and reduce vulnerability through, among other things, provision of cash to the poor and vulnerable, and also a rollout of instant weather indexed insurance, public works programs, and also emergency food aid and buffer stock management. Now, all these things come in relation to what has been happening in Karamoja as well as other parts of Uganda. A drought, famine have caused people to actually have children that are malnourished, but more so as we speak, over 900 people have lost their lives due to the situation that is happening in Karamoja. Patrick, good morning to you.
Yes, good morning.
How are you?
I am good, and good morning to our viewers.
Okay, could you give us an update on the situation in Karamoja as we speak right now?
Yes, the situation in Karamoja is still there. You still have people who are struggling to feed themselves. We do recognize government intervention and other state and non-state players who have jumped in to salvage the situation by providing food aid and many forms of support. But we can't say for sure that now Karamoja region is out of the woods yet. Okay. We still, I mean, because if you have famine really potentially happening in all regions, even the aid that comes to people has limitations as well. And it is something that we need to keep monitoring to ensure that all the necessary food that is needed comes in, to ensure that all the necessary aid comes in. And that's why the topic for today on social protection is very critical in ensuring that, first of all, that the necessary support is given, but also, more importantly, that we discuss a very elaborate shock responsive mechanism, not only to guard against famine, drought, and others, but also to deal with other emergencies that happen in the country, like floods, like mudslides, and the rest.
Okay, all right. One of the things that baffles me in particular is the fact that we continue to refer to these situations as emergency, because between you and me, this has been in occurrence way even past independence in 1962, and we have been having crop yields that are low. You've been having locust invasions. You've been having prolonged droughts, the floods, the food insecurity. So this is not so much as news. Why does government continuously refer to it as emergency?
Yes, of course, there's where it is really justified to call it an emergency, really, in a sense that there are some things that take so long, for example, to happen. But again, for Uganda's circumstances, like mudslides, for instance, in eastern Uganda, and some parts of possibly western Uganda, one wouldn't possibly call them emergencies because they are predictable. They tend to happen almost every year. Floods in Kasese, for example, they tend to happen quite regularly. So there's need for a coherent plan to guard against things that are expected to happen. But then you have things, for instance, that may take so long to happen, in which case then when they happen, they fall into emergency. But what is very important is not necessarily to debate whether this is an emergency or not, whether we are prepared or not, but rather to debate whether the country right now has sufficient safeguards against emergencies and also other forms of vulnerabilities that accompany those emergencies. For me, I think that's possibly more critical, because if we have shock responsive mechanisms, signals for emergencies that before they happen that we already know the indicators, then it helps us to plan much better and also ensure that actually people are not caught off guard. So we don't have to wait for things to happen, because something like famine, for example, is very predictable.
Okay.
Something like floods, we have the meteorological department. It should be able to make forecasts, in my view, and signals or red flags should be raised, and people should get prepared, and possibly mechanisms should be put in place to evacuate people, but also to shelter people, especially for those that would certainly be likely to be affected, like it does happen in other countries.
Okay, all right. Now, when you say social protection, what role should it be playing in such a time as this?
Yes, so for example, Karamoja is in a very unique state, and in 2011, when government enrolled the social assistance grants for empowerment, this is the money that goes to older persons. For Karamoja, because there were not so many people living longer, so the threshold or the minimum age of eligibility was put at 60 years of age. So they're already receiving older persons in Karamoja, who are I think about 53,000 Ugandans, are receiving a cash grant under senior citizen grant. So in a way, they receive some form of social protection. And if you look through the numbers, you most likely find that households which receive this money, although are in a situation of extreme drought, but they're not as vulnerable as those who don't receive. But also because now you have many members of the household relying on them, it would be very important that in a stage like this one, government would consider revising it from possibly 25,000 to maybe 100,000, so that that older person becomes a rallying point for that household in far as getting money to be able to buy things. And then, of course, the other issue would be then to open the gates so that goods and services can enter through Karamoja, so that even if you have cash, you have something to buy, because it is one way to have cash and also have something to buy. We also have an advantage in Karamoja that there are so many humanitarian organizations which are there, and in which case then they need to be supported, transport lines opened very properly, so that actually food aid can actually reach. And there's also something that I think would be very important. Government of Uganda development partners are, for example, implementing a NutriCash program in West Nile. And this NutriCash program targets mothers. And mothers receive cash, but also they get advisory services and support for nutritional elements to support the feeding mothers and also their children. This is also something that could be extended to Karamoja in many ways. And the reasons are that in a situation of extreme drought and the nature of the characteristics of the people of Karamoja, you definitely cannot expect that even if you possibly give them money, that people will be able to possibly feed properly, that children would actually grow well. Okay. So in my view, I think there are about 50,000 mothers in Karamoja right now, whom I think if they were targeted, it would help them hedge against children falling into extreme vulnerability, because mothers are targeted children, and if that relationship is not flourishing very well because of inadequacies of food and here and there, that ultimately undermines the potential of children, and especially in the long term. So for me, I think those are some of the things that are very critical that could be supported right now in Karamoja, to ensure that people have money to spend as well, but also they are nutritional support that actually comes there. One of the challenges that, again, I think that is happening in these programs that government is implementing is the issue of national identification. It is now mandatory that for you to access a government service, you need a national ID through NIRA. And what has happened is that most of the people at the registration stage did not register. And those who did register, for example, for using SAGE as an example, the Senior Citizens Grant, you have over 41,000 people whose national IDs returned with errors. And you know the process of getting through the errors, getting the affidavit, getting this, that, for a common person becomes very prohibitive. Even the remedial processes
for a process that is not decentralized at
yes.
that.
So that's why for social protection program, you're dealing with people who are extremely vulnerable. and then you're also conditioning them to go through another rigorous and possibly very advanced process. So we think it would be very important for emergencies now that happen, for instance, like Karamoja, an exception will be given so that other forms of identification can be explored, so that you're not leaving somebody behind on the basis that they do not have an ID, or if the ID they have possibly has an error. And this possibly goes to NIRA, that for example, for disaster-prone areas, for other persons, they could work with relevant government bodies to ensure that actually they do remedial registrations quite often, so that at the end of the day, you don't have people being excluded from a service simply because they don't have an ID, and it is actually not their fault that they don't have an ID. They actually applied for it, they got it, it has an error. You are an older person, your thumbprint cannot be read because the rims on your thumb have possibly changed or have been erased for one reason or the other. And I think those are some of the things that hinder uptake of some of the government programs that we have right now, especially the national ID challenge.
Okay, all right. Now, the Parliamentary Forum on Social Protection. I know that it has subscribers, members of Parliament, and one of the things that would be mandatory for them is to actually mobilize for as much, especially as far as the flow of Parliament is concerned, attention to such emergency situations. Karamoja is not the only one. It's the biggest, but we've had Mbale also having a state of emergency. Bududa has also had a state of emergency with the floodings that have been happening in that area. And so currently, right now, what are members of Parliament doing in mobilizing for social protection? So
members of Parliament, particularly from the Karamoja region, in conjunction with other members of Parliament and through the Uganda Parliamentary Forum on Social Protection, number one, have been disseminating information, indicating where the hotspots are and what the problem is on ground. And just last week, a press conference was held to tell the world about what is happening in Karamoja. Many meetings have been held with the Office of the Prime Minister and the Ministry of Gender to get to speed on what government is actually doing in ensuring that food aid and other relief items do get across to Karamoja particularly, and also some interventions are made for other emergency-prone areas like Mbale floods that we saw, Bududa areas that we saw. And part of the grand plan, again, is to ensure that members of Parliament push for a national social protection strategy, a national shock responsive plan that speaks to the realities on the ground. Because you realize, and as we stated from the beginning, that in many cases, some of the things that happen are seen way before they do, and we possibly in some cases wait for things to happen and then jump in. And we need to graduate from that level to a level of, first of all, ensuring that we have early warning signs that are well monitored, and also action that are tagged to them, so that at the end of the day, once we see a warning sign, then we jump in and be able to take some necessary action so that we save our people. Because ultimately, dealing with the effects of a disaster is extremely costly in terms of human resource, in terms of the money that is required, but also in many cases we would have lost life and livelihoods altogether. So if one did a preemptive strategy, that certainly would be better, and we expect that to come through the national social protection strategy, which we don't currently have. And that, in my view, would go along the way in ensuring that we get the safeguards that we need against some of these disasters. But also what is very important for members of Parliament, again, at this stage, would be to ensure that we have the contingency fund that is adequately funded, so that when you have an emergency, then you have money that you can pick. Yes, because in most cases, and you must have seen from possibly statements from government, especially when the Permanent Secretary of the Ministry of Finance was announcing the money that goes to different agencies, and indicating that some of the releases, were lower compared to what was planned, largely because of many challenges that are happening in the economy, but also money being directed to support interventions in Karamoja.
Okay.
Yeah, so you realize that still we need to have adequate plans and funds available in our contingents.
Okay.
So that when these things happen, then you are not cutting money from other sectors, you're not destabilizing the budget, you're simply picking from the bag and financing some of those actions.
All right, Patrick, in our closing remarks, I want to find out from you, what's the action step forward? Because as we speak right now, you have 4 out of 10 people in Karamoja not be able to have food, or at least the 2 meals a day. You do have 4 out of 10 Karamojan people are not able to actually have stock food to last them a month. You have those that are not even able to know if they can survive the next 90 days. So what's the action step forward?
Yes, for me, I think what government should do, government should consider a cash grant to every household in Karamoja, in my view, to give them money so that they can spend it.
Okay.
And also to ensure that the social assistance grants for retirement, the senior citizens grant, is given money, and people who qualified 60 and above can be able to have money on themselves, so that instead of actually going into their houses and dying of hunger, they can go and buy something. I also think the Nutri-Cash kind of nutrition, giving mothers money to spend to buy food, but also the advisory that comes with it would be very important, so that in situations of famine generally, you have mothers and children suffering more because of many other demographic challenges. But in my strong view, this also needs to be extended. And also the issue of national identity cards needs to be looked at. If people are going to be supported, let them come up with mechanisms of ensuring the people are properly identified and support is given, without using these stringent mechanisms where people have actually been excluded in terms of registration. So then government needs also to work very closely with development partners to coordinate aid. I know some members of parliament were actually saying they should actually declare Karamoja as a disaster, or as a disaster area, or whatever. But I think what is more important now is to ensure that aid comes there, in terms of food, in terms of money to buy goods and services that people need, but also to have a long-term strategy to ensure that next time we have early warning signs that we are going to have famine, then we'll have a corrective strategy that we can put in place to ensure, even if that actually happens, then you don't have the same level of vulnerability happening, because it is a shame to have people dying of hunger in this period.
I hope that next year, this time, I will not be having you, Patrick Katabaazi, having these same conversations and referring it quote-unquote emergency. Well, coordinator for Parliamentary Forum on Social Protection, we're waiting to see what more they get to do in regards to Karamoja and other places that are experiencing heavy emergency disasters right now in Uganda. That's been our Tech Note. We take a short breather. We return shortly.